A black CEO was slapped by a racist flight attendant because she looked out of place. What the attendant didn't know? The woman she disrespected was the undercover airline owner. One slap and everything changed. Stay to see how. The black CEO and the slap that froze the terminal. One slap, one cane on the floor. That's all it took to silence a terminal. She didn't enter like power. She didn't look like wealth. She didn't carry the aura of command that made people step aside before her shadow. Simone Booker, 63 years old, wore a plain charcoal coat, soft-soled shoes, and a scarf that had been folded so many times it barely held its edge. In one hand, she held a wooden cane, worn, old, but solid. She walked slowly, deliberately, eyes calm, focused, searching for nothing, commanding everything, but no one noticed. The boarding area was full. Phones lit up. Passengers scrolled, scurried, snapped selfies, grumbled about delays. Simone moved through them like background noise. She was just an old black woman to them, another anonymous figure they thought didn't belong in the world of elite travel. When she stepped up to the first-class priority lane, a few passengers behind her frowned. One whispered, another scoffed under their breath, and then came the wall. Tiffany Hale, early 30s, blonde, crisp uniform, practiced smile that rarely reached her eyes. Chief flight attendant, she had been scanning the crowd like a hawk all morning, eyes hunting disruptions, disturbances, deviations from order. And to her, Simone was all three. "Excuse me, ma'am," she said sharply, stepping directly into Simone's path. "This lane is for premium boarding only." Simone said nothing. She reached calmly into her coat and pulled out her boarding pass. 1A, first class. She held it out, steady and sure. Tiffany barely glanced at it. Her hand shot out, snatching the ticket with a force that caught Simone off guard. The sudden motion jolted Simone's wrist, and in that tiny moment, quiet, sudden, devastating, her cane slipped from her hand and crashed to the polished floor. It wasn't loud, but it was louder than anything else in that terminal. The sound echoed, a hard, flat crack of wood on tile, and the ripple effect was immediate. Conversations paused. Coffee cups froze midair. The hum of movement stumbled. People turned. A young man with wireless headphones yanked them off and started recording. A child asked loudly, "Why did she do that to the old lady?" His mother hushed him, eyes darting. Simone stood motionless, one hand still extended, the other hovering above where her cane now lay, sideways across the floor. Tiffany stood tall, rigid, holding the boarding pass like a badge of authority. Her eyes scanned the crowd briefly. She knew people were watching now. Her voice stayed firm. "You need to step aside." Simone knelt slowly, carefully to retrieve her cane. Her movements were deliberate, not from weakness, but from restraint. When she rose, she said nothing, but something in her posture had changed. Her shoulders were straighter, her eyes no longer quiet. Somewhere behind the check-in desk, a junior staff member flinched but didn't move. Another turned to look at the supervisor. The supervisor shook their head. Nobody intervened. A man in a gray blazer whispered to the person beside him, "She's got that look. Like, she's not someone you talk to like that." Tiffany repeated, "You need to exit the line." Simone didn't move. She simply looked at her. Not up, not down, just through her. Her expression didn't change, but the silence grew dense, and the crowd felt it. In that silence, the line of division became clear. Some people, uneasy, turned away. Others leaned in. A middle-aged black man 2 rows back stopped pulling his suitcase and folded his arms. An older woman clutched her pearls, not out of fear, but out of rising indignation. Simone adjusted the sleeve of her coat. Her cane tapped gently once against the tile as she regained her balance. Tiffany, suddenly more aware of the people recording, raised her chin and repeated herself. But the words now lacked weight. Her voice, just minutes earlier filled with authority, now betrayed uncertainty. The crowd shifted. A man whispered, "She's not leaving." "Something's off." A woman muttered, "I think that flight attendant's about to regret this." Still, Simone didn't speak. She didn't have to. Her silence spoke louder than any defense. It said, "I've been here before. You just never saw me." A young woman raised her phone and began live streaming. Her caption read, "They just disrespected someone they really shouldn't have." More phones lifted, more eyes fixed. Some passengers, moments ago dismissive, now whispered, "Who is she?" Others said nothing at all, but their posture shifted, their attention locked in, their instinct telling them they were witnessing something they'd remember. Tiffany swallowed. The balance had shifted, and yet Simone hadn't moved. She didn't flinch. She didn't explain. She didn't retreat. She stood still, her cane once again in hand. Her gaze now turned to the space beyond Tiffany. She was done asking for permission. She simply waited. And everyone else did too. No one dared speak. No one dared move. Even the flight announcements seemed to lower their volume. Time bent for her. The cane remained where it had landed, just beside her feet, still, angled, and telling the truth that no one had wanted to see until it struck the floor. It wasn't about a seat. It wasn't about a ticket. It wasn't even about the slap. It was about a black woman who had built an empire, now forced to reclaim her place not with force, but with stillness. And in that moment, even silence had a voice. Elegance undercover, the black CEO they laughed at. 5 minutes before the slap, she walked unnoticed. No security detail, no entourage, no fanfare. Just a black woman with a wooden cane, walking slowly toward Gate 3 while the world ignored her. Simone Booker had left the Aurora Lounge with a quiet nod to the staff who addressed her as Dr. Booker. Their tone had respect. Their eyes had recognition. But those watching from afar didn't hear the title. They saw only her coat, simple, well-pressed, but ordinary. They saw a scarf fraying at the ends. They saw a woman who looked like she belonged in the background. She didn't move fast, but she didn't need to. Her gait was slow, yet grounded, the kind of step that comes from someone who has spent a lifetime carrying rooms without needing to raise her voice. Her cane tapped in even intervals, tracing a rhythm that no one in the terminal paid attention to. Not yet. She passed a young couple laughing over an open suitcase, a group of influencers recording a vlog intro, a cluster of men in tailored suits whispering about mergers. Not one of them gave her a second glance. At the gate, Tiffany Hale stood reviewing her manifest. She was irritated. 4 first-class passengers had yet to check in. She mumbled their names under her breath. Green, Foster, S. Booker, Chan. She paused only long enough to scowl at the page before checking her watch again. Booker. The name didn't stick. Didn't mean anything to her. Meanwhile, Simone stepped neatly into the line marked priority. She didn't cut. She didn't drift to the side. She moved into her lane as if she had always belonged there. Because she did. The young gate agent standing there offered a warm smile as she approached. "Good morning, ma'am," he said, reaching for her boarding pass. He didn't get the chance. Tiffany moved quickly, intercepting with the efficiency of someone who lived in a world of rules and assumptions. She placed herself directly in front of Simone. "Excuse me," she said, with that tight-lipped tone of strained politeness. "This lane is for priority boarding only." Simone looked at her, said nothing. She reached inside her coat and pulled out her first-class boarding pass. Tiffany accepted it with a swift motion, barely scanning the seat number. She didn't check the name, didn't verify the barcode. She simply decided what she believed to be true, and reacted. She handed the pass back with a quick flick, then looked Simone over again. "You'll need to move to the general boarding lane," she said flatly. Simone raised an eyebrow just slightly and handed the ticket again. Tiffany took it, this time with more force. Too much. The sudden tug shocked Simone's wrist. The boarding pass bent slightly, her cane tipped sideways from her arm, and then it happened. The cane dropped to the floor, a clean, heavy crack of wood against polished tile. The sound cut through the noise like lightning through cloud. People nearby turned their heads instinctively. Conversations hiccuped. A man lowered his phone from his ear. A child in a bright yellow hoodie stopped mid-hop. The cane spun once, then again, then settled on its side. For a brief second, nothing else moved. The young gate agent stepped forward, then hesitated when Tiffany shot him a look. She was still holding the boarding pass, fingers clenched a little too tightly. Her breathing had changed. Simone bent slowly, gracefully. She picked up her cane. She straightened. And for the first time since entering the terminal, she truly looked at Tiffany. It wasn't anger in her eyes. It wasn't even contempt. It was clarity, an assessment, a mirror. Tiffany took a step back. The crowd hadn't formed yet, but several people had paused. A man in a suit adjusted his cuff and leaned slightly to see. A woman with a stroller furrowed her brows. Someone opened their phone's camera without hitting record just yet. Still no words from Simone. Tiffany opened her mouth to speak again, But the words felt heavier now, less certain. Her body stood tall, but her posture had shifted. There was tension in her jaw, in her stance. A second attendant, older, more experienced, approached slowly from behind the gate. She made brief eye contact with Tiffany, then looked at Simone. Recognition flickered, but she said nothing, just hovered nearby. Simone finally reached for her boarding pass, still in Tiffany's grip. The touch made Tiffany flinch ever so slightly, but she let go. Simone held the pass, now creased, and inspected it. Then, wordlessly, she placed it gently into the inner pocket of her coat. The silence around them deepened. It wasn't loud. It was dense. A woman pulled out her phone to take a photo. A teenager nudged his friend and whispered something neither of them would remember, but they'd remember this. Simone didn't move from the line. She didn't gesture. She simply waited. Tiffany looked around. Her authority had not vanished, but it was shifting. She tried to summon it again. "Ma'am, I need you to—" But her voice faltered. She knew something had cracked. Something more than the cane. And that's when the businessman in the platinum suit stepped closer. Not to intervene, just to watch. Closely. He didn't speak. Neither did Simone. And that silence roared louder than any boarding announcement in the terminal. The flight attendant, the slap, and the airline owner. They thought she was just another angry black woman, until her ID dropped, and every jaw followed. No one saw her reach into her bag. It wasn't a dramatic gesture. It wasn't meant to silence or humiliate. Simone Booker simply retrieved what was hers. A small, brushed metal card holder, worn at the edges. She opened it slowly and pulled out a single card. She held it in her palm for a second, just long enough for the nearest passenger, a man in his early 30s wearing earbuds and a Patagonia jacket, to glance at it. His expression changed instantly, from boredom to disbelief. He leaned forward. "Doctor? Simone Booker?" He read aloud, just loud enough to catch the attention of two people beside him. "Founder and chairwoman? Aurelia Air?" That name was a spark in dry grass. Heads turned. A woman holding a toddler turned completely around. A teenage boy zoomed in with his live stream. Someone whispered, "Wait, she owns the airline?" Another voice responded, "She is the airline." Tiffany didn't speak. She couldn't. She stood motionless, the boarding pass still in her grip, her hands trembling now, not from cold but from realization. Simone turned to her, not with spite, but with the stillness of someone who had waited long enough to be misjudged. And then came the shift. From the edge of the gate, a door opened. A man in a dark blazer stepped out, fast, purposeful. Victor Tran, Senior Ground Director. He had been watching the footage feed. The second he recognized who was standing at his gate, he moved. He walked straight up to Simone. Didn't ask a question. Didn't hesitate. He bowed his head and said, "Dr. Booker, my sincerest apologies. The moment I was informed, I came personally." Simone nodded once. She didn't need the apology. She had known this moment would arrive. Victor turned to the crowd. "Everyone, this is Dr. Simone Booker, founder and chairwoman of Aurelia Air." Gasps, audible, loud. Some people clapped a hand to their mouth. One man in a business suit whispered, "Jesus Christ." A woman with a travel pillow on her neck muttered, "Oh my God, we messed up." The young man with the live stream flipped the camera around. "Yo, the lady they disrespected? She owns the airline. The whole thing." Tiffany's face drained of color. She stumbled one step back, then caught herself, but her hands were visibly shaking. Simone didn't look at her. She looked past her, at the crowd, at the staff, at the line. Then, with her cane once again in hand, she took a deep breath and spoke. "I will board," she said quietly but clearly, "but no one is to be fired today." Victor blinked. "Ma'am." "She doesn't leave," Simone said, motioning slightly toward Tiffany. "Not yet." The crowd murmured again. A woman whispered to her partner, "That's how real power moves." Victor looked to Tiffany, then nodded slowly. "Yes, ma'am." The boarding area opened. A path formed, not because someone cleared it, but because people moved. People parted. Simone stepped forward. Each step was deliberate, graceful, a presence that didn't need force to be felt. As she passed, people lowered their phones, not out of obligation, but out of respect. Not a sound left her mouth. But everyone heard her message. A child standing beside his father lifted a small hand. Simone saw it. She nodded once and smiled. Not a grin, but the kind of acknowledgement that said, "I see you. I honor you." A woman near the windows dabbed her eyes. Tiffany didn't follow. She stood in the same place, spine straight, shoulders stiff. Her chest rose with shallow breath. But something had shifted. No longer the one who owned the space. Now, merely trying to stay inside it. Behind her, a flight attendant trainee scribbled furiously in a small notebook. Observing, recording, learning. Simone reached the threshold of the boarding tunnel. She turned slowly, for the first time, and looked directly at Tiffany. There were no words, but the look was enough. A look that said, "This moment will live longer than your silence." A look that said, "You were never meant to decide where I belong." Tiffany nodded once, almost imperceptibly, the first crack in the armor. Victor gestured toward the aircraft. "Right this way, Doctor." Booker. She stepped inside. No red carpet, no flashbulbs. Just the sound of rubber soles on metal and the quiet hush of dignity earned, not declared. The passengers in the lounge didn't cheer. They didn't clap. What they gave her was something far rarer, silence rooted in reverence. As the boarding resumed, no one cut in line. No one rolled their eyes. Even the loudest man in the room had gone still. The woman they thought invisible had just made the entire terminal feel small. And Tiffany Hale, who had once controlled the gate, stood frozen in the place where her authority ended and someone else's presence began. Would the flight attendant apologize if she didn't slap the airline owner? The cabin was quiet. Not the quiet of sleep or routine, but of reverence. A hush had fallen over the first-class section like a silk veil, light and suffocating all at once. Simone Booker sat in seat 1A, her cane tucked beside her, her fingers resting gently on the rim of a teacup she hadn't yet touched. She didn't need to speak. She was watching. Across the aisle, Victor Tran stood with his hands folded, his voice low but firm as he leaned toward her. "Dr. Booker, I'd like to formally ask that the lead attendant, Tiffany Hale, step forward and offer a direct apology. Here, before the cabin." Simone gave the faintest nod. That was all. Moments later, the curtain parted. Tiffany entered the cabin like a shadow chased from its corner. Gone was the composed posture. Gone was the precision in her stride. Her steps were measured now, like she had to think about each one. Her face had lost all the color it once held. The tray in her hands barely steadied the glass of water she clutched like a shield. Passengers lifted their eyes as she walked past. No one spoke. Phones tilted quietly into recording positions. A woman in a window seat slid her sunglasses into her bag. A man near the front slowly removed his earbuds. Tiffany stopped 2 feet from Simone's seat. She did not look up. Her voice cracked before it carried. "Dr. Booker, I'd like to sincerely apologize for my earlier behavior." She recited it, words prepared, polished, practiced. But there was no breath behind them, no eye contact, no weight. Simone didn't blink, didn't flinch, didn't acknowledge the apology. She simply set her teacup down on the tray table, and in a tone soft enough to disarm and sharp enough to pierce, asked one question. "Would you still apologize," she said, "if I were just a tired old black woman with no title?" The cabin didn't just fall silent, it froze. The man across the aisle sat back slowly in his seat. A woman in row 2 inhaled sharply and put a hand to her chest. A pair of young travelers in business suits paused their recording, not out of respect, but because their hands trembled. Tiffany's mouth opened slightly. Her eyes lifted for the first time, unsure, caught mid-blink. She looked directly at Simone, for a second, maybe 2, and then lowered her gaze again. She didn't answer. She couldn't. The question was already answering itself. A passenger in the rear of the section wiped at her cheek. Someone shifted in their seat, uncomfortable now, not because of tension, but because truth had arrived and taken a seat among them. Simone leaned back, folded her hands in her lap, and said nothing more. Victor turned to her. "Would you prefer another attendant for the remainder of the flight?" Simone's eyes didn't leave Tiffany. "No," she said quietly. "Let her serve me." Tiffany's breath caught. She gave a brief nod and walked away, unsteady but upright. She disappeared behind the galley curtain, and the quiet murmuring began again. But it wasn't judgment this time. It was reflection, recalibration. A middle-aged man near the window removed his glasses and stared at them like they held the answers. A woman with short silver hair whispered to her seatmate, "I've never seen grace used like that. Never." Minutes later, Tiffany reappeared with a fresh tray, a teacup on a pristine saucer, a linen napkin folded to perfection, a second hand slightly behind the first as she walked, more aware of her presence than she had ever been in uniform. She moved with caution, not the fear of making a mistake, but the fear of repeating one. Each step towards Simone was deliberate, each breath timed, as if she was balancing not just a tray, but a moment. All eyes followed her, and she knew it. When she reached Simone's seat, she placed the tray down gently. The cup didn't rattle, the napkin didn't shift, the spoon didn't clink. Her hands, for once, didn't tremble. Simone looked at the tray. Then slowly, very slowly, she lifted her gaze. Not to inspect, not to judge, to witness. Their eyes met. No words were exchanged. There didn't need to be any. Simone's stare wasn't soft, it wasn't harsh. It was deep, searching for signs of something only Tiffany could reveal. And in that instant, Tiffany didn't hide. She didn't run. She didn't blink. She stood there holding that gaze and breathed like someone just learning how. From behind, a trainee watched, clipboard in hand, pen frozen mid-sentence. Not out of hesitation, out of awe. 2 rows back, a little girl whispered, "She looks sad." Her mother, eyes still on Simone, replied softly, "She's becoming someone better." Tiffany bowed her head slightly, not as an apology, but as acknowledgement. And then, slowly, respectfully, she stepped back. Simone picked up her tea, held it for a moment, then brought it to her lips without drinking. The message was clear. "I see what you're doing. Don't stop." And Tiffany didn't. She stood still, composed, grounded in something new. Now, not her uniform, but humility. The flight attendant who saw herself in the black CEO's silence. The tray was gone. The silence remained. Tiffany Hale stepped back through the curtain into the galley, but she didn't feel like she had returned to safe ground. Her hands were still trembling, though not from fear anymore. It was the weight of what hadn't been said, the weight of who had said nothing and made her feel everything. She stood before the mirror mounted behind the coffee unit. Usually she'd fix a stray hair, adjust her collar, refresh her lipstick, but this time she just stared. The reflection didn't blink. It waited. For the first time, she let herself look. Really look. The face staring back wasn't professional. It wasn't composed. It was undone and familiar in a way that made her chest tighten. Images flashed through her mind. The cane hitting the tile. Simone's eyes, measured, unshaking. The way the entire terminal had turned to silence. Not because someone shouted, but because someone didn't. And then came others. A flashback, months ago. A black woman in her 70s trying to board business class. Tiffany had questioned the ticket, citing routine verification. The woman hadn't complained. She just quietly moved back to coach. Another flashback, a Latino father asking which gate to use for stroller access. She'd pointed with a half glance, already walking away. None of those people had raised their voice, but now those moments screamed, a soft rustle behind her. A junior attendant had stepped into the galley, saw her still, hesitated. For a second, she looked like she wanted to speak, but didn't. She just nodded once and stayed nearby, her presence saying, "I see you." Then a folded napkin appeared in Tiffany's hand, passed to her by another crew member. Written on it, in slanted handwriting, "We see you trying." Tiffany didn't know who wrote it, but her hands tightened around it like a lifeline. Just then, another order came in. T, first class, row 1A. Her chest locked up. Of course it would be Simone. It had to be. She didn't ask someone else to go. She didn't pause. She washed her hands twice, checked the water 3 times, aligned the cup, saucer, spoon, and napkin 4 times. Not because she feared getting it wrong, because for the first time, she wanted to do it right. As she walked back down the aisle, passengers turned, not to judge, but to witness. The atmosphere was different now. She could feel it. They weren't waiting for her to fail. They were watching to see if she'd choose not to. She reached 1A, set the tray down slowly. The tea didn't spill. The cup didn't clink. Simone didn't look at her. She looked at the tea, then gave the faintest nod. It wasn't forgiveness. but it was recognition. Tiffany turned and walked back, slower now, not because she was tired, but because she wasn't rushing away from herself anymore. When she returned to the galley, she sat down on the narrow bench by the emergency door. Not collapsed, composed. She pulled a napkin from the dispenser, took out a pen, and wrote, "I failed her. But worse, I failed who I could have been." She stared at the words, then folded the napkin in half and placed it gently in her pocket. A pair of shoes stepped closer, the trainee, clipboard in hand. She hadn't said a word all flight. She didn't now either, but she saw the napkin. Her eyes met Tiffany's. She gave a small nod and silently tucked the moment into her notes. Tiffany stood again, straightened her jacket, brushed her palms once. She stepped back into the aisle. The cabin was steady now, its energy grounded. Some passengers looked up. Others nodded subtly. One woman gave a half smile. Nothing said aloud, but something had changed. Tiffany walked the aisle, not with certainty, not yet, but with commitment. She wasn't trying to earn back trust. She was learning how not to lose it again. She stopped mid-cabin, just paused, not for drama, just to breathe. And in that breath, she didn't turn around. She didn't run. She didn't hide. The black CEO who didn't fire the racist flight attendant. They waited for her to fire the flight attendant, but instead, the black CEO taught her what no termination letter ever could. By the time Simone Booker entered the boardroom, the tension was thick. It was the kind of room where brands are protected, headlines are managed, and decisions are made for damage control, not growth. "Immediate dismissal," one executive pushed. "We need to show the world we don't tolerate discrimination." "Clean break, public statement, done by noon," another added. But Simone didn't rush. She sat at the head of the table, still calm, listening. And when silence settled, she didn't lift her voice. She just let it carry. "Punishment ends the story," she said, "but she hasn't finished learning." She laid out her plan. 6 months of mandatory training, not a seminar, not a checkbox, a full immersion program focused on racial empathy, bias recognition, cultural service, and personal accountability. Not just watched, measured, lived, supervised by her office directly. Some in the room fidgeted. One raised a brow. Another opened their mouth to object, then closed it again. Simone leaned forward. "We don't change people by removing them," she said. "We change them by giving them something they can never unlearn." There was no vote, just quiet nods. The power in the room had already answered. Tiffany Hale stood outside the door 10 minutes later, waiting to be called. No makeup, no suit, no excuses rehearsed. When she entered, no one looked at her with pity. They didn't need to. She didn't come to beg. She listened to every word of the decision without interrupting. Her hands stayed folded. Her head bowed once, not in defeat, but in readiness. Simone said the last line herself. "Forgiveness is harder than firing," she told her, "but it lasts longer." Tiffany nodded. No words, just breathe, just forward. A week later, in a modest classroom tucked into the 3rd floor of the training center, Tiffany sat at the front. Not because she had to, because she knew she needed to. The instructor wrote the first sentence on the board. "What have you learned from the moment you weren't proud of?" Tiffany stared at it longer than anyone. Next to her sat the same trainee who had witnessed everything. No judgment, just quiet understanding. From a coat pocket, the trainee handed Tiffany a folded napkin. Creased, worn, kept. Tiffany unfolded it. Her handwriting stared back. "I failed her, but worse, I failed who I could have been." She smiled. Software not triumphant, not broken. The kind of smile that means something is starting, not ending. When class ended, she didn't rush out. She stood slowly. And when she stepped into the hall, her reflection in the glass door didn't look like someone who had been forgiven. It looked like someone who had chosen to become someone else. This story reminds us, true power doesn't slap back. It stands still and lets the world correct itself. The black CEO didn't need revenge. She needed reflection. And the undercover airline owner gave the racist flight attendant something harsher than firing: growth. If this slap taught you something, hit like, subscribe, and stay tuned. We're just getting started. What would you have done in her place? Have you ever seen quiet strength shift an entire room? Your thoughts matter. Let's keep the conversation going. See you in the next story.